This video is already far too long and you've already read the title, so I'm going to skip the preambles and get right down to it. First up, we are starting with what I and many others consider to be the most important death in television history. While visiting various college open days with Meadow, Tony spots a guy who looks a lot like an old friend of his. But before he's able to get a closer look at the guy, he speeds off. Later, he tells Christopher that the friend that he thinks he saw was Febby Petrulio, an ex-mobster who became an FBI informant.
I'm not sure, but I think I just saw Febby Petrulio. Made guy, he fucked about 10 years ago when he got busted for peddling H. Took out a lot of people from our outfit. And I think I did, but I'm not sure.
Up in Maine? What the f***?
He went into the witness protection program, then they kicked him out. Now he goes to colleges and gets paid all kinds of money to talk about what a big bad mafioso he was. But Jackie and Pearlie knew him real good. They did a couple of counts together up at Lewisburg. As a matter of fact, you know that bus that was in his rec room with Sinatra? Febby made it for him in a prison workshop.
That was Frank, that bus? I always thought it was Shaquille. I need to practice a little on lips.
Remember that part, it becomes important later. After having Christopher run his plates just to be certain, he finds out that the car is registered under the name Frederick Peters.
Frederick Peters, Febby Petrulio. Good match, huh?
Tony decides to get one final piece of confirmation before sending Febby to the witness protection program in the sky. He looks him up in the local phone book and finds an Italian travel agency under his name and pays it a visit. When he spots a bust of Ronald Reagan with lips that would make a duck blush, he knows he's got his man.
Hello, Rat.
Unbeknownst to Tony, Febby realizes that he's being hunted and decides to turn the tables and put an end to all of Tony's detective work. And he probably would have been successful, but at the last minute, Febby notices that he's with his daughter. Then he spots other witnesses and decides to chicken out. I'm certain he won't end up regretting that act of mercy, despite being with Meadow and Christopher's strong arguments for him being the one to take out Febby.
I'll make sure you and Meadow have cleared the state before anything happens. We don't ever meet face to face. I am your soldier, Antonio. This is my duty, like we're always talking about.
Tony insists on eliminating Febby personally.
You stay put. End the discussion.
The next day, while in his office, Febby leaves to investigate some rustling outside, but when he sees that it's just a deer, he gives a sigh of relief. But before he can even take in another breath, Tony sneaks up behind him and strangles him with a makeshift garrote.
Good morning, Rat. You took an oath, and you broke it.
I could have killed you last night outside the motel. Your daughter was drunk, remember? I was there in the parking lot. I had a gun, but I didn't do it. Because of her, I told myself, it's just a coincidence. Taking this little girl to college.
You know, one thing about us wise guys, the hustle never ends.
Despite all his pleading, Tony continues to brutally choke him and even checks his pulse afterwards to ensure that the deed is done. This wasn't self-defense or even a crime of passion. This fits the definition of premeditated murder perfectly. A subtle detail that I'm almost certain you missed the first time watching the show was that immediately after, a flock of geese fly directly overhead. If you remember from the first episode, the geese flying away from his pool causes him to have a panic attack because they represent his children and he fears losing them. The contradiction of Tony being a cold-blooded mafioso who assassinates people while visiting colleges with his daughter, while also being the type of sensitive soul who cries over duckies and the idea of his kids growing up, was an unprecedented level of character complexity. Before any smart-ass drops a "well actually" comment, yes, I use the terms geese and ducks interchangeably because I'm not a goddamn ornithologist. I don't know the difference between them, and neither does any normal person. Back to Febby. While on the surface this doesn't seem like a big deal, especially to modern audiences, at the time it was unheard of for a TV protagonist to murder someone in cold blood in such a brutal way. As I said earlier, this isn't self-defense. He isn't killing him as a last resort in order to save innocent lives. He's going out of his way to kill someone who, as far as he knows, poses absolutely no threat to him or anyone else. Unlike many of Tony's other kills, it isn't really that morally ambiguous or complex. It's just straight up evil. Allowing your main character, the person the audience is supposed to root for, to do this was rightly viewed as a massive gamble that could kill the show. And given all the context, I can see why HBO pushed back when Chase showed them the script for the episode, as even now, I think there's only a handful of characters who have ever gone to such a dark place. Then HBO president Chris Albrecht said, "You've created one of the most compelling characters on TV in the last 20 years. And you're going to ruin him in the 5th episode?" But Chase responded, "I think we'd lose the audience if he didn't kill that guy. What kind of mobster is that?" And I 100% agree with Chase. If the show pulled its punches on the gruesome scenes like that, then it would feel like a procedural. It wouldn't have the same visceral hit that it does. It wouldn't feel grounded the way that it does. But that's just this idiot's opinion. I'm open to conflicting ideas in the comments. But after a heated exchange, Chase was allowed to keep the scene. And I would argue that if we didn't get this scene, then we probably wouldn't have got our favorite dirtbags, such as Walter White, Donald Draper, and Vic Mackey, and several other popular TV anti-heroes. That is what makes it, in my opinion, the most important kill in television history. But as a concession to the HBO executives, Chase was forced to make it seem like Tony had no choice in murdering him, which is why that scene where Febby tries to convince some junkies to kill Tony feels so out of place.
You follow. An hour out of town, you pull up alongside, boom, 12 gauge. That. Lon, you do what I ask, so you'll never get another bag off me.
That scene always bugged me, even before I found out the backstory. So we're supposed to believe this guy is giving college talks about his life as a mafioso, at the same time running a travel agency, and then he still has time to sell H on the side. Overall, I'm giving this death a 10 out of 10. The juxtaposition of Tony strangling a man to death while in the middle of a weekend college tour with his daughter is the cherry on top of the evil cake. The contrast of him being a loving and supportive father, but also a psycho who can snuff out a man's life and go about his day like nothing happened, was literally paradigm shifting. And the entire episode serves as a microcosm for the main theme of the show. Which Tony is the real Tony, the loving family man, or the murderous psycho? And David Chase's response appears to be,
¿Por qué no los dos?
when the FBI revealed to Tony that Junior was behind the failed attempt on his life in an attempt to convince him to flip.
My cousin KK, after he had his lobotomy, he looked exactly like my son.
Olivia.
Empty, a shell. Better KK had died than go on living like that. That's what his own mother always used to say.
What are you talking about, meetings? Well, who, for Christ's sake, Olivia?
All of them. Raymond. Larry.
3 of my capos have their mothers in this place? If this is true, Olivia, you know what I mean, I'm the boss, for Christ's sake. If I don't act, blood or no, I have to.
He realizes that his life is still at risk until Junior's crew is removed from the board.
If I'm your uncle, I gotta finish what I started. He could strike first.
Yeah, and he won't use boys to mend this time. He'll go with who he knows.
Chucky, signore. No, Mikey's now too high up. So Chucky's gotta disappear without setting off any alarms.
While Tony expresses regret for the part he played in things escalating into full-blown war.
But I never should have raised him about eating. This whole war could have been averted. Cunnilingus and psychiatry brought us to this.
He decides to go on the offensive and eliminate the man that Junior would most likely send to kill him.
Tom, Jesus Christ, relax.
What the f*** you doing here?
Taking us to God's, put in the marina next door.
No shit.
Look at this baby, I caught right off the point here.
I go back and forth on this death. On one hand, Tony is firing an unsilenced gun in broad daylight within the view of all the cars on the bridge, which is basically begging to go to jail. But on the other hand, it's so over the top and cartoonish that I suspect that this is done deliberately. I mean, he pulls a gun out of a fish, for Christ's sake. I can never make it through this scene without laughing, so I'm sufficiently entertained. But I can imagine that this will be a pretty immersion-breaking scene for people who don't really watch The Sopranos as a comedy. It's heavily implied that he and Silvio attach a pair of cement shoes to his feet and take him for a little swim. That's a great way to send a message to Junior. Louis Brazzi sleeps with the Fisher style.
Luca Brasi. Luca.
Whatever.
Overall, I'm giving this kill a 6 out of 10. Easily the goofiest death in the entire show. There's something about Matthew's face that is so punchable, and clearly, I'm not the only one who shares this opinion. Christopher takes Matthew and his butt buddy Sean
No more burritos or you're not working with me.
to get supplies for the executive game.
Put that shit in the trunk so it don't stink up the car. Pay for the fish.
This guy for real or what? We're pitch boys?
Already you can see his discontentment with where he sits on the family tone pole. Ahead of the meeting, Chris gives the pair of them the sternest possible warning to stay as far away from Silvio as possible.
Whatever you do, don't engage Silvio in conversation. He can be a sick when he's gambling.
Despite that, he still manages to repeatedly pester him somehow. A small detail that you might have missed is that Tony deliberately sets him up.
So get a broom and sweep up some of that shit over there, especially on the Silvio, all right?
They must have put the horn.
You can even see him smirking in anticipation because he knows exactly what's going to happen before it does.
What the are you doing?
Sil, take it easy.
I'm losing my balls over here. This moron's playing Hazel. All right? I love cheese at my feet. I stick motherfucking provolone in my socks at night so they smell like your sister's crotch in the morning. All right?
I suspect that this is Tony's way of punishing him for being overly familiar when they were first introduced.
Matt, Tony wants you.
Yeah, T.
Tony.
Later, the pair get involved in a few break-ins with Christopher when Furio pays them a visit at their apartment in order to collect Tony's share of the proceeds. The pair are stupid enough to show him just how much they made from the burglaries, so Furio decides to impose a stupid tax.
Give me $1,000.
1,000 more?
Christopher said 10%. $1,000.
Can't fucking believe this. You're ripping us off for Gino. This is bullshit.
Just to pour salt on the wound, he even says that they suck each other's happy sticks in Italian. Frustrated with the constant disrespect and lack of progression within the family, the pair decide to cozy up to Richie April while venting about Christopher and his massive nose.
The attitude on that camel nose f***. He ever lays his hand on my niece again, I'm gonna tear him apart piece by piece.
They learn that Richie also hates Chris. Granted, he has a bit more of a justification as Chris keeps beating on Adriana.
We are nowhere. Buying fish, punching safes. What is that and for what?
We gotta do something to get ahead in this world.
Based on this, Tweedledum and Tweedledee manage to get into their heads that the best way to curry favor with Richie is to carry out an unsanctioned hit on Christopher. Given that they don't have 3 brain cells between them, the attempted hit goes about as well as you can imagine. Despite catching Christopher completely unaware and having the numerical advantage, Sean manages to get his brain blown out and Matt is forced to flee for his life. And worst of all, they didn't even manage to finish the job. When Matt tries to scamper back to Richie for protection, he almost gets beaten to death for his troubles and is forced to go into hiding. He manages to find out where he's been hiding, and he and Tony drag him to the refreshment shack where they interrogate him to find out if anyone put him up to this.
Tony, I'll tell you anything you want to know.
What'd Richie say?
It's nothing to do with Richie. He didn't ask for it. He got mad when I told him. Sean did it on spec.
When Tony is satisfied that he's telling the truth, Tony decides to play good cop and asks Puss to go get him a drink.
How is that? I mean, you sure you want a diet drink? You don't want something with some sugar in it?
There's only diet. It's good.
You finished?
Thank you, T.
Cause that sugarless motherfucker, the last drink you're ever gonna have.
That line gets me every time. The pair continue to repeatedly shoot his lifeless corpse in a scene that borders on comical and is vaguely reminiscent of Sonny's death in The Godfather. While it must have been cathartic to avenge Christopher, Tony ends up dealing with a lot of backlash as a result. Firstly, the police find Matt's dead body, and they even find a witness willing to testify that he saw Tony enter the building.
I'd hate myself if I didn't come forward and help you put these people behind bars.
Fortunately for Tony, when it's revealed to the witness that Tony's in fact a mob boss rather than a crack dealer, as it was initially presented to him, he refuses to cooperate.
The victim has now further been identified as Matthew Bevilaqua, a Soprano family associate.
officials close to the investigation are keeping tight-lipped, as it may involve a high-ranking mafia member.
Oh my God.
Where's that detective's number?
On the fridge?
Lying suckers.
I knew it, but you had to be the big man.
Tony narrowly manages to escape justice, but even he has to admit that he dodged a massive bullet.
Well, isn't it fair to say we were staring into the abyss? A very close call, that brush with a murder beef. I told you. I was home alone. You and Macaulay Culkin.
The second form of backlash that Tony experiences is the psychological burden of killing Matthew. While in the mall, Tony sees a little boy crying and asking for his mother, which causes Tony to have a flashback of Matthew's final pleas for his mommy.
God, Mommy! Mommy, please, Tony, please!
Later at home, Tony tells Carmela that he wants to spend more time with AJ. Whether this is because he wants to play a more active role in AJ's life in order to keep him on the straight and narrow and prevent a premature end like Matt's.
I want to spend more time with AJ.
That's the other one you should spend time with. She's almost out of the house.
Hey, I'm not worried about Meadow. Meadow can take care of herself.
Or whether it's simply to lessen the burden of the guilt he's been experiencing is anyone's guess. Overall, I'd give this death a 7 out of 10. While Matt is a pretty insignificant character in the grand scheme of things, the focus on the aftermath of his death was the real difference maker for me, as I think it's one of the few underexplored topics on the show. With all the murder that goes on, you'd think we see more characters dealing with the psychological fallout of killing someone. When Vin Makazian, a detective on Tony's payroll, tells Tony that PUSS is an FBI informant, he can't bring himself to believe it.
I'm sorry, I know you like him.
Like him? I f***ing love him. Now who's your source?
He demands hard evidence, as he just can't fathom that PUSS would do something like this to him.
I want to see the report.
I can't give him my hand.
I want to see the f***ing 302.
All right. See what I can do.
While waiting for the confirmation, you can see the tremendous burden that this is placing on Tony.
What kind of mental stuff would cause a backache?
With some people, the pain is caused by more responsibility than they can handle.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, he's got a lot of bills, a lot of problems with his kid's school fund.
Secrets. Psychologically, a secret is a heavy load. It leads to feelings of guilt which further burden the mind.
He looks almost relieved when he learns that Vin is a degenerate gambler who owes PUSS $30,000. And given that if PUSS was to disappear, so would his debt, Tony decides to take his information with a grain of salt.
Doesn't mean he's a liar. Just means he's got a reason to see dead. It buys him time. Could this prick have the balls to try something like this?
Hey, we're talking about 30 grand here. I didn't want to think about what me and you would do to remove that debt.
Luckily for Big PUSS, before Vin is able to produce any hard evidence, he's found at a mob-run bordello. Realizing that he's probably going to lose his badge, or at the very least be perceived as a crooked cop from now on, he decides to end his suffering by jumping off a bridge. With Vin no longer able to confirm, Tony is left in a Schrodinger's rat situation. So he sets Paulie to investigate whether or not PUSS was an informant, with strict instructions not to act until he sees a wire.
I want you to see it. Otherwise, all bets are off. You understand? This is our friend we're talking about here. You say it. You understand?
I understand.
Paulie takes him to a steam room under the guise of it being good for his recently injured back, but really it's so that he can have a look at his chest.
Why don't you want to take your clothes off?
I got high blood pressure, you f***ing idiot. I go in there, I can check the f*** out. My doctor mentioned steam and sauna specifically as no-nos.
When Jimmy Altieri pops up unexpectedly at Tony's house, acting suspicious and asking odd questions.
So, what are you gonna do about the Colombian money?
Tony is certain that he's found the rat.
The wire, it's f***ing Jimmy!
He concludes that Vin simply mistook the pair due to their Rubenesque physiques.
Casey and Sky got his facts crossed. They both got busted at the same time. Two fat with black hair.
After calling in the exterminators, who make quick work of Jimmy.
Would you forget our captain?
Why don't you call for help in your radio mic, you rat?
God.
What's the matter? Not wearing one tonight?
Nah, he didn't have time to put on anything decent. God.
Tony tries to contact PUSS, but he's nowhere to be found. Tony suspects that Paulie might have jumped the gun despite his instructions.
You answer me like I'm Jesus Christ himself, and if you fucking lie to me, may your mother die of cancer of the eyes.
Paulie insists that he didn't do anything.
Did you do it?
Tony.
Shh. Don't fucking lie to me. Did you do it?
No.
Did you fucking do it?
No.
You can do it? I said no!
After Puss's mysterious disappearance, Tony falls into a deep depression.
Did your lady therapist know about this? Maybe you need more medication.
She already got me on lithium and Prozac. What else you want?
Aromatherapy, something. This is not normal for a healthy adult male to take to bed like this.
My best friend has disappeared. He's probably dead, okay?
This is the lowest we see him in the entire show, as he's basically catatonic. The combination of not knowing if your best friend betrayed you and guilt over you possibly killing them would be enough to leave most people bedridden, as you can't even get catharsis from either grieving or being angry. Eventually, Puss does resurface.
Come into the house.
I got your word. If I walk in there, I'm walking back out.
I don't see you for all this time. No word. Nothing. This is the way you come back to me?
Do I got your word?
Claiming to have been in Puerto Rico getting treatment for his bad back. While Tony is clearly a little skeptical about the details of the story, he's just happy to have his friend back and somewhat reluctantly lets him back into the fold. But he does pass him over for a promotion, resulting in Furio, who is several years younger and also recently joined the crew, being his equal, if not superior in rank.
Puss, want to give us a minute?
I'm in the middle of eating.
I know. Do me a favor, will you, sweetie? Keep this warm. Thank you. 5 minutes. All right?
It's like all these years were for nothing.
What'd I tell you? You think Tony really gives a flying about you?
This causes him to change from a reluctant informant who just gave an occasional small, insignificant crime here and there to a full-on rat.
An airline ticket from the Scatino bus stop. Tony made the guy order blocks of these things through the sporting goods store.
I'll put it on file.
You could use it as probable cause for a warrant, couldn't you? Evidence of extortion, intent to defraud. Those are RICO predicates, right?
This engagement party for the sister? I'm gonna wanna wire you up. I know you're sensitive.
F that. What the was I, his errand boy?
The pressure caused by the conflicting loyalties leads to him mentally snapping.
1 minute he's talking about how much he loves Tony Soprano, and in the next breath, he's a junior G-man. He's talking about RICO predicates and probable cause. All of a sudden, we're the good guys. It's the worst case of Stockholm Syndrome I've seen since Patty Hearst. I'll tell you, though, I'm kind of worried about Sal with these fantasies of law enforcement.
Eventually, he starts to think he's Magnum PI.
5:16 a.m. Subjects departing Searchlight Diner.
Yet, despite his inner turmoil and wild fantasies, he does a pretty good job of concealing the fact that he's an informant from the crew. The only potential slip-up that I can find is when he goes into a bit too much detail when explaining the calling card scam to Furio.
Immigrants especially, no offense. They're always calling back home to whoever the and it's expensive, right? You sell thousands of these cards to the greedy pricks, cards at a cut rate. But you bought the bulk time on credit, remember? The carrier gets stiffed. He cuts off the service to the card holders, but you already sold all your cards.
While that doesn't sound inherently suspicious, he just goes into a bit too much detail, and he's a bit too, thorough with it. almost like he's given a thorough explanation to someone else, the FBI perhaps. While it doesn't appear to have raised any red flags with anyone else on the table, I get the impression that for Tony, it caused something to subconsciously click into place. And we see evidence of this during Tony's bad Indian/seafood induced fever dreams.
You know I've been working with the government, right, Tom?
Don't say it.
Come on, Tom. Sooner or later, you gotta face facts.
I don't want to hear it.
Well, you're gonna hear it. You passed me over for promotion, Tom. You know.
While I'm not generally a big fan of the dream sequences, I found the foreshadowing Puss sleeping with the fishes interesting, even if it was about as subtle as a brick to the head.
These guys, on either side of me, they're asleep.
Don't say that.
When he's finally done purging his system, he decides to purge his crew of its traitor.
Tony!
Hey, Ann. How you doing?
Good, good. How are you?
I'm on my poor ass.
He pops up at Puss's unannounced, claiming to need help picking out a boat. While there, he manages to find Puss's recording equipment, confirming his suspicions. I've always wondered whether Tony would have killed him even if he didn't find any evidence, as up until this point, Tony was simply working off of a hunch, so he must have planned to take him on the boat trip before knowing definitively whether or not he was a rat. When they corner him on the boat, he claims to have been feeding them only minor information for the past year and a half.
I will do nothing, Tony. Nothing to put you in harm's way. All he is.
That's how I got tipped off about the Bevilaqua hit, huh? Because you did nothing.
On my mother's eyes, that wasn't me. Little things. Picayune shit.
Be specific.
They know about the calling cards. I'm not in that. But what else? That's it.
While they all know what needs to be done, Silvio and Tony just don't have the stomach for it. Paulie being Paulie is completely unfazed, and if anything, looks eager to get it over with. They share one last drink together, and a final joke.
26. I'm telling you this broad. Her ass was the second coming. Never wore panties. Brush the teeth with this shit. Every night she'd drink me under the f***ing table. I'd eat her out when I was down there.
Hey, Push. She even really exist?
I gotta sit down. I feel like I can't stand. Is that okay, Tony? Did I sit?
After Paulie, the always sensitive soul, strips the body of its valuables, they struggle, but eventually toss him overboard to sleep with the fishes. Overall, I've got to give this one a strong 8. It was a really entertaining game of cat and mouse between Tony and Puss, but it does lose some points because the aftermath was a little underwhelming. They don't really explore the psychological burden that it would have left on Tony much. It's subtly alluded to during one of his therapy sessions.
Rage, Anthony, is a big, loud, flaming self-distraction from feelings that are even more frightening.
What feelings might those be?
Sadness. You go off on a racist rant about Indian food, your demented old bat of a mother. What else has happened?
Nothing.
After 2 years treating you, I've learned things, and I pick up sorrow coming from you.
But considering that this was one of his best friends, I think he'd be a little bit more torn up, especially when you take into account how hard he grieved when Puss went missing the first time. But while his immediate grief might have been underwhelming, almost a whole season later, we see that he still isn't over it when he sees a talking fish that reminds him of Puss in his office and decides to take out his grief and anger on poor developmentally disabled Georgie.
Who brought this in here? Georgie. It's wacky, huh? double-sided rating. They were selling them. What?
But overall, really entertaining and one of the more memorable deaths in the show. This is the one that I'm sure most of you have been anticipating. Ralph is easily the biggest pile of dog shit to grace The Sopranos. For me, he's up there with Joffrey from Game of Thrones or Marlowe from The Wire in terms of despicable villains that you love to hate. But I won't go into too much detail on him now, as I plan on making a full greatest villain of all time video on him. Throughout season 4, there's tension between Tony and Ralphie. Tony doesn't really try very hard to hide the fact that Ralphie disgusts him, but he's a good earner and a made man, so Tony is forced to put up with him despite his heinous actions, including the murder of a 21-year-old stripper that he knocked up. While Tony is initially angry enough to put hands on him, under the rules of their system, Tony is actually the one that's in the wrong.
Boss or no, you don't raise your hands to another made guy.
Of course. Rules are rules, otherwise what? F***ing anarchy.
Fearing for his life, Ralphie apologizes, primarily for disrespecting Tony and the Bing.
You wanted to see me?
Yeah, Tony.
About what?
About what? You know, to apologize. I disrespected the Bing. And the girl.
Tony reluctantly makes him a captain when Gigi dies taking a crap, but refuses to drink with him,
We're gonna have a drink together or what?
as he's still clearly disgusted by him. Much later, when their working relationship has massively improved, they decide to go splitsies on a racehorse. Tony, being the animal lover that he is, naturally he falls in love with it. Shortly after it becomes clear that the horse is likely to become a money pit due to illness, it suddenly comes down with a bad case of being set on fire.
There was a fire at the stables. They lost some horses.
Pyomai?
She survived, but...
Why did you tell me I'm a half hour late back from lunch?
I'm sorry. We did everything we could, but she had to be destroyed. She was too badly burned.
And while the insurance companies are happy to accept that it was an electrical fire,
What up?
Fire marshal says it looks electrical. They found pieces of a blown-out light bulb in a stall, and the hay was a natural accelerant. They'll investigate, but it's a formality considering the value of the stock.
Tony knows what really happened and decides to confront Ralphie.
How's Corky Iannucci? You heard from him lately? You know, still used him in that restaurant fire. Excellent work.
You know, I don't understand you, Anthony. We got lucky. That accidental fire was a bolt from beyond. Now, I know it's tragic to think this way, but you can't argue with the f***ing logic.
Jesus Christ, you did it. You cooked the f***ing horse alive.
This goes about as well as you can imagine.
Don't give me that look. It was a f***ing horse. What are you, a vegetarian? You eat beef and sausage by the f***ing carload.
Despite taking bug spray to the face and a knee to the nutsack, Tony manages to overpower him and chokes him to death.
It was a beautiful innocent creature. What did she ever do to you?
A subtle detail that I missed the first time is Ralphie dying like this was foreshadowed in the scene where Tony's forced to restrain Ralphie at the hospital.
Stop! Ralph, stop!
Tony calls in Christopher to help him clean up and get rid of the body, but claims to have found Ralphie like this.
I found him like this.
I love The Sopranos, but 99% of the time, it acts like fingerprinting and DNA just don't exist. So I like the extra care they took on this one. We see them clean the house, drop the body in a lake, and then bury his dismembered hands and head separately before burning all their clothes. While he's happy to play along with Tony's charade, it's clear that Christopher doesn't buy his "I found him like this" crap for a moment.
Here's the problem, as I see it, with Ralph getting whacked. People could take it the wrong way.
What are you trying to convey to me here?
Friends of ours. Like it could happen to them. Without, the protection of the boss.
It also causes Tony's captains to lose faith in Tony, as according to their rules, a boss can't simply kill a captain over a dead horse.
This is bad, my friend. I mean, don't get me wrong. I wouldn't piss on this Ralph if he was on fire. But to whack the guy over a horse, how up is that?
It can happen to him, it can happen to any of us.
And what's next? You get clipped for wearing the wrong shoes?
While I consider myself an animal lover, but even I have to admit that it's kind of funny that Tony is so much more shaken up by the fact that his horse died than he is by having to choke someone to death. In a textbook douchebag Tony moment, he tells a grieving Furio to get over his recently deceased father.
What's the matter with you?
Sad for my father.
All right, but you gotta get over it.
And then proceeds to cry like a baby about Pai O Mai. Even Melfi points out that his blubbering doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
It's sad that you've lost something that you love. That being said, it is a horse. The only other time you've become this emotional in here, it was those ducks.
That was different. That was a whole different thing. They were ducks.
Is it different? You haven't grieved in this way for people. Your mother, your best friend.
Can't I just be sad for a horse without some touchy-feely, Freudian shit component to it?
My theory is that a lot of Tony's feelings towards Pai O Mai weren't just about Pai O Mai. There were also him expressing his emotions regarding how Tracy died. And you can see this from the long lingering stare that he gives a photo of Tracy in the Bing immediately after getting rid of Ralphie. Overall, this was definitely a 10 out of 10 death. It had a long build up, a dramatic climax, a well thought out and realistic immediate aftermath, and even had some long-term consequences.
I think I know what happened to Ralph, and if I'm right, he ain't coming back. It was New York.
Johnny Sack?
What was it? A fat joke?
Sure that didn't help.
Tony pinning the murder on Johnny Sacks in New York drives a wedge between New Jersey and New York.
Ralph, where's your point man on this thing? He missed his drops this week.
I don't know. Maybe you can tell me.
Which ultimately culminate in all-out war. Tony Blundetto's arc is one of the best in the entire show. It's a massive shame that we only got him for a single season, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Tony Soprano's cousin, Tony B, comes back after doing 16 years in prison for a hijacking.
Anthony Blundetto in that same crime film in The Sopranos.
Let me see how he looks.
Still is 28 years old when he went away, a rising star.
Remember, growing up, I was always asking why I just used to have sisters. I said to my mother, I said, can't you save up something and then get me a baby brother? And my mother said, what's wrong with your cousin Tony? And she was right, because we were brothers. Tony's being away. It's been hard. But he's back now. For good. So welcome him. Welcome him.
This hijacking defines their relationship, as Tony Soprano feels guilt over the hijacking as he was supposed to be there too. The only reason he didn't show up was because he got into an argument with his mum and passed out, braining himself on the corner of a table in the process, while Tony S is guilt-ridden and can't help but think about what his life would have been like if he had shown up like he was supposed to. Tony B, at least initially, seems quite cool about the whole thing, like it's water under the bridge. Despite this, Tony can't shake the feeling that Tony B resents him for not showing up.
We try to do everything we could.
I know. I mean, I wasn't around. What can I expect? I mean, if things had gone different way back when, who knows?
What do you want from me?
Nothing. I'm just saying, it's good it wasn't both of us.
But Tony B has bigger fish to fry, as he's determined to stay legitimate, and even refuses Tony's offer to get in on a stolen airbag scheme.
I got my associate's degree already. It took me 5 years, and now it's only like 6 months more for my massage license.
So you want to run a massage parlor?
No. I'm gonna be a licensed massage therapist.
While disappointed, Tony respects his cousin's wishes and even helps him get a legitimate laundry job working for Mr. Kim. While Mr. Kim doesn't trust Tony B initially, due to him being ex-con.
I don't forget you professional criminal.
Let me ask you something. If I really wanted to rob you, you think I'd have to put up with this bullshit?
Well, just so you know.
He eventually does warm to him when he learns of his aspirations to become a massage therapist.
You study hard for massage, yeah? What's the thing I get stuck with you, I think? Oh, shit, goddammit. You lazy American and criminal. Not good for Kim. But you, worker for Kim and future. Like a Korean people.
And even offers him a 50-50 business partnership once he fully qualifies.
You pass test, then you, me, my daughter, we make the big success journey.
Initially, Tony B is thrilled by this and begins pulling double shifts, working in the daytime at the laundry and getting the massage parlor ready at night. Shortly after he fully qualifies, he lucks into 12 grand. And while this seems on the surface like it'd be a great thing, with all this disposable income, he's now able to party and gamble with the rest of the crew. At first, this isn't too bad, as he ends up burning the candle at both ends, but still manages to fulfill his responsibilities. But eventually he ends up gambling away all of his money.
You blew the whole 12 grand? What are you, stupid? I got 400 left. Punch in 2 hours. There's no sense going home.
And that's when the frustration starts to build up. After an argument with his wife,
I am so fucking sick and tired of your gambling and complaining. I've got a headache. When I think of me waiting outside that prison for you to come out, sometimes I want to vomit.
he ends up taking out his frustrations on Mr. Kim, who hasn't really lifted a finger to help with their joint venture.
So, partner, we open in 3 days, huh?
Stroll in. You're busting my ass.
The entire fight scene is so hilarious, but that block and chop to the gut cracks me up every time. With his bridge with Mr. Kim irreparably burnt, Tony B is forced to return to a life of crime.
What happened with the massage parlor? It's hard doing business with strangers.
When Angelo, a close friend of Tony B while he was in the can, asked for a favor.
We need something done. Nice little payday for you, and an opportunity for you to hone that rep you left behind.
And this involves?
Somebody needs to go.
Anyone I know?
New York guy, not Jersey.
Who's he with?
Friend of a friend, not a friend of ours. Friend of Johnny's.
He initially refuses, as he knows Tony S doesn't want his crew getting mixed up in New York's succession war between Johnny and Carmine Jr. When his children start to notice just how much more Tony S has, it dawns on Tony that he's fallen so far behind.
You took this tonight, didn't you?
I bought it from AJ.
You stole this from your cousin who opens his house to you?
I found it on the floor way in back of AJ's closet. He doesn't care. With all the stuff he has, he got to go to the Olympics and everything. I love where he lives. I don't want to come back here.
So he accepts the hit job on Joey Peeps. While the hit doesn't exactly go off without a hitch, he does manage to take out Joey and limp away to fight another day. When Tony figures out that he was the one that whacked Joey Peeps, initially he's all piss and vinegar.
What's up?
Turns out somebody got a look at the guy that did Joe Peeps. All they got so far is he's got a bad limp.
Huh. Long John Silver, maybe.
Where the did you get the balls?
But somehow ends up giving him a $200,000 a year casino gig.
I'm sick of you leaning on this cousin thing and that bad hijack like you can do whatever the it is you want to do, because you went away that night and I didn't.
You're the one keeps bringing that up. I'm fine with it.
I had high hopes when you got out.
Yeah?
Look, a guy like you, brains, balls, I could use all that.
Put me in, coach.
All right, we got the casino on Bloomfield Avenue above the hardware store. Carlos guy was running it, but he just got diagnosed with the Hodgkin's.
That's mine?
Yeah.
So he basically ends up getting promoted for disobeying orders. I'm certain Tony B is gonna learn the error of his ways after that harsh punishment. Tony S even goes as far as to cover for him.
My cousin could not have been in the city that night because he was with me.
I swear on my mother, Tony, if I find out you're lying.
Shortly after Angelo pays Tony B for services rendered, Billy Leotardo kills him. As soon as Tony S hears about what happened, he knows exactly what his cousin will do. He tries to get a hold of him, but it's already too late. Tony B's on the warpath. When he eventually gets to sleep, he has nightmares about Tony B shooting Phil. And as soon as he wakes up, he finds out that reality is much worse than even his nightmares. Not only did Tony B fail to kill Phil, but he hit his kid brother in the process. After Tony's attempts to apologize and make peace fail.
Let me just say how sorry I am for your loss. We all are.
Take your sorries and stick them in your ass.
New York make it clear that if Tony doesn't hand over his cousin, it will be all-out war, with Christopher being a likely target.
He tried to talk, he couldn't even say his last words. Anybody ever die in your arms, you sucker? A family member, somebody you love?
No.
Well, give it time. See if I can't make that happen for you.
Tony's hesitance to give up Tony B, even at the potential cost of his life, hurts Christopher deeply and drives a further wedge between them.
He could get us all killed with New York, and him. Tony has to think about what to do with him now. Me, he don't need to f***ing think. Well, maybe I need to think.
When Tony B finally surfaces and calls Tony S, Tony S confesses the real reason why he didn't show up for that hijacking 17 years ago.
The night you went away, 17 years ago, I told you that I got jumped by a couple of shines. That's why I didn't show. Well, it was all bullshit. I got in a fight with my mother and I passed out.
And that the guilt from it was why he's been so lenient and patient with him. Tony S figures out that he's holding up on their uncle's farm and is prepared to give up his cousin. But when he asks Johnny Sachs, the newly minted boss of New York, for his permission to take care of Tony B himself, or at the very least ensure that he has a quick death, he more or less tells Tony to kick rocks.
I want your promise it'll be quick.
I'm not gonna lie to you, Tony, I don't have to. Phil's gonna do it. And he'll do it his way.
This is me now. Come on.
Anything else?
This causes Tony to reconsider giving up his cousin.
Go f yourself. You and Phil and whoever.
I get the impression that this had less to do with the love or even guilt that he feels towards Tony B, and more to do with his ego and anger at the high-handed approach that Johnny Sachs was taking with him, despite them being longtime friends. Silvio even says as much.
All due respect. You were ready to hand him your cousin a week ago. So it's not about standing with the guys or upholding some rules. Not really. Then what's it all about? Why don't you illuminate me? It's about you don't want to eat shit from John. You don't want to bow down. I've known you since you were a kid, Tom. Frankly, you got a problem with authority.
Bill is determined to settle this blood debt, one way or another, and starts hunting for Christopher.
Well, we're friends of your son's.
My son doesn't live with me.
We're, from Alcoholics Anonymous.
What's your name?
Well, we're anonymous.
Eventually, the constant threat of New York looking for retribution starts to weigh on Tony's captains.
I'm willing to die for a good cause. This is bullshit.
But Tony tries to claw back the troops and justify why he isn't handing over his cousin.
It's been made clear to me that if they put their hands on him, he will not be dealt with quick. Talking torture. For that reason, even if I knew where my cousin was, and I do not, I would not deliver him up to them. I am offering him the same protection that I would offer any of you in similar circumstances.
When Phil fractures a member of the crew's skull while looking for Tony B, Tony is forced to reconsider his course of action and seriously think about whether his responsibilities to his cousin outweigh his responsibility to his men. When he meets up with Paulie and sees that he saved and restored the painting of Tony and Pyomai that he ordered destroyed, he gets another insight into how his men see him.
Something that catches more of what you're really all about.
A goddamn lawn jockey?
That's not a lawn jockey. That's a general.
That, combined with remembering what his coach told him.
I told you many times, Anthony, you were special. You had smarts, personality, leadership potential, all the perquisites to lead young men onto the field of sport.
During his nightmare, causes him to realize that as a leader, his duty should be to his men rather than to his feelings of guilt. So he takes out his cousin quickly and painlessly. I think Tony S. views his killing of his cousin as a mercy, and it probably was the best thing that Tony could do for him without endangering the rest of his men. It's clear that Tony's left with a bittersweet sort of feeling that he survived and may have even done the right thing, but at the cost of his soul. Random thought, but I think this is the exact feeling that the writers of Game of Thrones were going for with Dany's death at the hands of Jon. He then calls up Johnny Sachs and tells him where Tony B is hiding, leaving Phil to find the dead body, and he's none too pleased.
What? Didn't solve a thing.
It's over, John.
He's beside himself now.
The best thing for him, for you, for all of us, is to put this thing behind us and get back to business.
They meet up the following day and manage to broker a tentative peace.
Let's talk, John, about the 500-pound elephant in the room, which is that you started this cycle of bloodshed.
What do you suggest?
Well, whatever his legitimate sorrow, he's got a price. He wants to provide for his family.
And
what? Read his price, and that's it. I don't want to hear nothing else.
Oh, you don't?
I paid enough, John. I paid a lot.
But when the feds swoop in to arrest Johnny, Tony manages to prove that he had the makings of a varsity athlete by evading them. Overall, that was a 10 out of 10 death for me. In my opinion, it's the most thematically rich death in the entire show. My favorite Faulkner quote is that the only thing worth writing about is the heart at conflict with itself. And we see a ton of that in the lead up to Tony B's death.
Why don't you get the out of here before I shove your quotations book up your fucking ass?
Jokes aside, the internal conflict within Tony makes for not only some of the best episodes in the series, but some of the best television of all time. It asks us relatable questions like, how long should you hold on to guilt from the past? When is it justified to cut off a family member? And which takes precedence? Loyalty to your biological family or loyalty to your chosen family? Similarly, Tony B's failed redemption story also poses some interesting questions. Can people ever change? How do you cope when you feel like life and others have passed you by? And do cycles of vengeance ever end? All these themes and questions are explored while still keeping it central to the main plot and contributing to the wider build-up of tensions between New York and New Jersey. As I said before, 10 out of 10, no notes. Tony and Christopher's relationship is one of the most interesting and fleshed out arcs in the entire show. I intend to make a full video covering it in detail later, so I'll keep it pretty brief. While the two of them have what is more or less a father and son dynamic.
When he was born, I would hold him in my arms. He was an adorable kid, too.
You always talk about him more like a son.
In some ways he was. Especially after his dad died.
Even if it isn't exactly the healthiest, at the start of the show, it's very clear that they both love each other. But as the series progresses, tensions between the two compound. In my opinion, the real turning point in their relationship is Adriana's death, when Adriana was facing being an accessory to murder and attempted to get Christopher to flip on Tony and become an FBI informant. Like a loyal soldier, Christopher sneaks off and tells Tony, in the process sealing the fate of the love of his life. While grieving over this, Chris turns to drugs in order to help him cope with the pain. And rather than sympathizing with his loss and the guilt that Chris must be feeling, Tony decides to take a different approach.
I can't stand the pain. I love dog.
I have a happy marriage.
But there was a woman. She worked with us in a club we had. Anyway, she became a problem to deal with, and I sided with him. She was out of my life. Okay, fine, but he never appreciated it. Give, it's all I ever do. I think that's when the relationship between me and him got poisoned.
Later, when Christopher's knockoff Saw movie premieres, his subconscious rage and hatred towards Tony is laid bare for all to see.
I'm the boss, Michael. What you had belongs to me.
Even the girl I loved?
What's mine is mine. What's yours is mine.
This is mine too, Sally. Now you can have it.
It's not exactly subtle, so of course someone like Tony identifies the deeper meaning.
But I got an IQ of 136. It's been tested.
Son of a...
That's you. It is.
It was based on you.
I know, you said. The yelling.
It wasn't just the yelling.
Imitation's a form of flattery.
You think that was flattering?
It was okay. It's a movie. It's fictional.
It's a revenge fantasy, Tony, which ends with the boss's head split open by a meat cleaver.
Christopher eventually attains everything that he's ever wanted. He has a nice big house, a nice car, a beautiful wife, and a kid. But despite this, he continues to struggle with sobriety. And I've always empathized with this. Christopher's shown that he can stay sober for long periods of time. If you look back at the show thoroughly, most of the times in which he relapses, it's either triggered by traumatic events like Adriana's death or Tony belittling him. Yet Tony repeatedly fails to support him.
Go have a live Ricky or whatever the is you're drinking these days, and we'll be done in a few minutes.
Or even take his struggle seriously.
You, of all people, should understand how hard it is for me to be around that place.
I should? Why?
Because you're in therapy. You understand the human condition, at least. Between the booze and the strippers over there, half of them are cokeheads. It's hard, you know?
Then just quit. You want to be it, too bad. Show some balls.
I got balls. It's not that simple.
Well, make it simple.
It's a disease. I inherited it. You know the problem with my mother.
Tony refuses to see it as a disease.
I gotta be honest, this whole disease concept, I think it's bullshit.
So you know more than a leading scientist now.
I know a crutch when I see it.
So my dad? You obviously must have knew he had a crutch.
And I know a lot of people who take this just say no simplistic stance and fail to acknowledge that predispositions towards certain addictions or temperaments even can be heritable. So I love that Chris actually pushes back on that stupidity and says, what is your opinion based on? You're just pulling it out of your ass. It's not based on any data or evidence. It's just a gut feeling, aka pulled straight out of your anus. The irony, of course, is that he acknowledges that these predispositions exist when talking about his son's battle with depression.
Obviously, I'm prone to depression. A certain bleak attitude about the world. It's like when they're little and they get sick. You'd give anything in the world to trade places with them so they don't have to suffer. And then to think you're the cause of it.
How are you the cause of it?
It's in his blood, this miserable existence. My rotten putrid genes have infected my kid's soul. That's my gift to my son.
And even earlier, most of the Soprano men are prone to panic attacks. Yet he continues to belittle Christopher for something which is largely out of his control. Tony continues to pressure him to be in environments that will likely lead to another relapse.
My boss, you know, for all his bullshit encouragement, how he respects what I'm doing, the reality is he resents my sobriety. He's an enabler too, this guy, the worst kind. Pours you a drink with one hand, judges you with the other if you take it. But I can promise you, I'd have more money in my pocket, plus more responsibility if I sat with him drinking, watching that scotch drool out of his fat mouth.
And when he eventually does, with the help of Paulie,
You realize by the time Caitlin's out of college, it'll be like the year 2027 or something?
She takes after you. She won't be out of fourth grade by then. Of course, by that time, she'll be working here, so who gives a shit?
he begins to violently spiral out of control. When driving Tony back from a meeting with Phil, they get into a car accident. They both survive, but Christopher's pinned in place, and when he reveals that he's high,
Help me. I'm covered. I'll never pass the drug test.
Tony looks back at the mangled car seat and can't help but think what would have happened if Chris's daughter was in the car. At first, he tries to help him, then ultimately reconsiders and decides to put Christopher out of his misery by blocking his nose and letting him choke on his own blood. This whole thing happened so quickly and so unexpectedly that the first time I watched it, I remember my jaw being on the floor. I've seen a lot of debates about the ethics of what Tony did here. Like, a lot of people I know side with Tony and think that he made the right call. Christopher was ultimately a risk to his child, so the best course of action was to remove him from the situation. But I think that line of reasoning fails on two levels. One, because it fails to take into account the part that Tony played in this situation. While ultimately Christopher's responsible for his own actions as an adult, Tony definitely didn't help. And had he behaved differently, it's very likely that Christopher might have been able to stay on the straight and narrow. Secondly, growing up without a father dramatically increases his daughter's probability of ending up working at the Bing, just like Paulie predicted.
After he murdered me, Tony gave my wife and baby his pocket change.
You pay what you owe. That shaved twat of yours belongs to me.
It's not like Tony's likely to step up and be a father figure to the kid. And even if he does, that didn't exactly work out so well with Christopher. While Tony can pretend it was all about protecting an innocent child, I think him deciding to kill Christopher had just as much to do with his complicated feelings and resentment towards Chris for hating him.
And it occurs to me, I hand-carried this kid to the worst crisis he ever had. I can't go into particulars, but wives, girlfriends, they can complicate life in a major way. I don't have to tell you that. Anyway, huge problem of his own making. And he cried. He couldn't deal with it. So, I took up the slack. I handled it. I felt sorry for him. Now, he talked gratitude. But guess what pity produces in the recipient? They shit on your pity. And that's what broke the camel's back.
I feel like there's a good chance if he wasn't wearing that Cleaver hat when the accident happened, Tony might not have killed him. We get a deeper insight into his true feelings during his dream sequence therapy session.
I haven't been able to tell anybody this, but I'm fucking relieved.
Really?
He was a tremendous drag on my emotions, on my thoughts about the future. Let me tell you something. I've murdered friends before, even relatives. My cousin Tony, my best friend, Bush. But this? Was I talking in my sleep?
Snoring.
His lack of remorse at murdering what is effectively his son is Tony at his most psychopath.
No, it's just, I mean, he's practically like your own son.
I'm sorry, Sally. I think we ought to give him a pass.
I didn't ask you what you think.
Overall, I've got to give this death an 8 out of 10. It was a little unceremonious and unexpected, but I think that was the intended effect, as it made it feel more realistic. There doesn't always need to be foreshadowing, build up, and then a crescendo. The abrupt passing of such a major character is deliberately jarring and was actually a major turning point in the show for me, as it was when I kind of fell out of love with Tony. Like, up until now, I knew he was a bad person, I knew morally reprehensible, but for the most part, my feelings toward him were largely positive. This, and especially his reaction to Christopher's death.
He's dead.
What? What?
Definitely served to highlight to me that like this guy's irredeemable and he's actually just like a morally repugnant like piece of crap and there's no redemption for him. But that's just this idiot's opinion. Feel free to debate the ethics with me in the comments or just let me know if I missed out on anything. As you can imagine, this was like ball-breakingly long and tedious to assemble, but it was a whole lot of fun. So it would be much appreciated if you drop a like or a comment, as it helps the video and increases the probability of me being bothered to make another one. Also, feel free to suggest any other videos you'd like me to cover, and most importantly, take care of yourself. Life can be rough, so the least you can do is be kind to yourself.